Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I'm AskSindyKing. I have a special guest. His name is Ernst Whilhelm, and he's an astrologer. And today we're going to be talking about Rahu and Ketu. And I believe he's such a good expert in this area. We're going to be focusing on the relationship part because that's a really demanding. And like Ernst was saying, if you kind of focus on Rahu and Ketu, everything else takes care is in the chart. So Ernst, welcome back to my channel. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has. Thanks for inviting me, Cindy. Good to see
You're
you.
Yeah, it's good to see you today. So, can you tell me a little bit more what we should do about Rahu and Ketu, especially either in a personal chart or even a relationship chart, whatever we kind of look at Rahu and Ketu and how we should diagnose that?
Yeah. So when it comes down to it, doesn't matter where in your horoscope you're going to find Rahu and Ketu, they're going to be causing you a lot of the work you have to do in your relationship. Okay. The reason is because Rahu and Ketu represent our ancestors. And the sad thing about relationships is that a huge part of how well our relationships work are dependent on our ancestral influences. Because as modern psychologists have, demonstrated over and over again, our relationship with our parent has a huge bearing on our relationship with our significant other. And so our relationship with our parent is dependent upon their relationship with their parent, and that's dependent on their relationship with their parent. So we have all this ancestral influence that we're dealing with whenever we come into relationship with another person. And there's always an element of I like to call it a crapshoot when we get together with someone, in that when two people come together, are they going to be able to embrace and be with each other in a way that helps them heal the results of their ancestral influences? Or are they coming together? Are they going to come together and only prod that pain and prod those wounds? Okay. Now, there's always going to be an element of prodding the wounds, the pain, okay, that are, from the ancestral influences, from our upbringing, from our early experiences with our parents. But people can come together and heal those or not. And ultimately, that's what's going to determine a relationship's ability to succeed. If they can come together and actually heal those ancestral influences, those wounds that they carry in them, then they're going to progress forward, and the relationship is going to be a healthy relationship, meaning it's going to provide health to the people. Relationships that fail ultimately don't do that. Okay. Now, everyone is struggling with those ancestral influences, where everyone is struggling with Rahu and Ketu, and everyone that's impacting everyone in no matter where your Rahu and Ketu is in the chart. Okay. I just want to mention Rahu and Ketu for people who aren't familiar with Vedic terms, Vedic astrology terms. Rahu is the north node of the moon, and Ketu is the south node of the moon. Okay. In astrology, we have on this saying that the planet Rahu, the period of Rahu can always give marriage. Doesn't matter where it's in the chart. Most marriages happen. Rahu Dasha gives more marriages than any other planet does. And a lot of people are surprised by that. But the reason that is because Rahu is the planet where we're like going to work out that new stuff we have to learn. It has to do with healing our ancestral influences. And most of the times it requires a partner. And it doesn't matter where your Rahu is in your chart. Okay. So we can't get away from Rahu and Ketu influencing our relationships. And when I start looking at a chart, what I like to look at is basically 4 distinct ways that Rahu and Ketu are influencing the chart. Okay. So we have 12 houses, but in the context of relationships, we really need to focus on not the house that Rahu and Ketu is in, but the house cusp they're closest to in the context of the angle. So we have the first house cusp, the 7th house cusp, which are opposite each other. Then we have the 4th house cusp and the 10th house cusp, which are opposite each other. Okay. So anytime we have Rahu closest to one of those cusps, that's the cusp that's defining our main relationship challenge. Okay. So we simply see, is it closer to the 1st cusp, the 4th cusp, the 7th cusp, or the 10th cusp? Which one of those 4 Rahu's closest to? And then Ketu is going to be closest to the opposite. Okay. So once we know that, we know the main dynamics that are going to be taking place in a relationship. Now, and I'm going to explain all that. The reason we do this is because the fourth house is the mother and the 10th house is the father, right? And so those houses are going to have a really strong influence on relationships when Rahu and Ketu are there. Okay, what I mean by that, the closer Rahu and Ketu are to the 4th and 10th cusp, the greater the need is to heal the ancestral wounds in order to have a good relationship. Which is a nice way of saying the closer Rahu and Ketu are to the 4th and 10th cusp, the harder relationships are going to be, okay? Same for the 1st and 7th house. So the 7th house is the 4th house from the 4th, so it's a second house of the mother. And the 7th house is also the 10th house from the 10th. So it's a second house of the mother. So your 7th house is where your mother and father are sitting there together, influencing your love life because of your parental upbringing, okay? And, it's like almost a big chunk of what happens in our relationships are based on our experiences with our parents. The other big chunk is our own level of self-esteem. Who the person is only like 10% of the equation, actually, okay? Sadly, most of the equation, almost 90% of the equation is our own self-esteem and the influences of our parents when it comes to how harmonious or dysfunctional a relationship's going to go, okay? The right person more makes it that, okay, it's worth working through these dysfunctionalities, okay, more than anything else. It gives you a better goal. So, so any times it's in these angles, 1, 4, 7, or 10, Rahu and Ketu there, we're dealing with strong parental issues, which means we're dealing with strong ancestral issues, okay? So the closer Rahu and Ketu are to the angles, especially when they're in the same sign as the angular cusp, as the 1st, 4th, 7th, or 10th cusp, the more targeted a person's development is based on their relationships. Okay, and that basically means the more confusing and intense relationships will be. Okay, so there's a saying in Vedic astrology that if we have 2 or more malefics on angles, relationships or happiness in relationships is not guaranteed. Okay, so the minute you drop Rahu and Ketu on an angle, you're already up to 2 malefics, right? So anytime you got Rahu and Ketu in the 1st, 4th, 7th, or 10th houses, right away you know relationships are not going to just fall into place and be easy for people, okay? So if you're lucky from the relationship point of view, if Rahu and Ketu are in 5, 8, 2nd, 11, things like that, 3rd, get a little away from the 4th and 10th and 1st and 7th houses, you've got a little less stress in that department, depending on other things, of course, because other things can make it bad too. All right, so depending what house Rahu's in, there's going to be a big difference in what the focus is, or closest to. So if a person's got Rahu closest to the 1st, Rahu closest to the 7th, which means Ketu is closest to the 1st, they're basically self-reliant people who are really learning how to have a relationship, and they're really learning about what the value of a relationship is. They don't recognize what the relationship can even offer me. Okay, most of their relationships, especially in their early life, are really based on what's happening in their own head. Okay, it's not really based on what's happening with the other person. Okay, because the house that Rahu is closest to is the jungle. It's the place where we've never been. We have no ideas what's in that deep, dark jungle. So we sit there on our castle wall where it's nice and safe, and we imagine about all the crazy things in the jungle, the treasures that will be found, the dangers that will be there, the things that can happen. And none of them are based on reality, okay? So when Rahu's in the 7th house, a person is having this vision of love, this vision of relationships, And none of it is going to be the actuality of their experience when they start going into that jungle of love. Okay. But that's how they're assuming and believing and expecting relationships to go. All right. And so, and that assumption is so strong, it actually takes them longer to be able to actually just see and relate to a person on a truly one-on-one basis. Okay. Because they have so much force of their own ideas going into it already. Okay. All right. And so you can imagine that's going to create a lot of problems along the way. It'll create a lot more stumbling blocks. It'll create a lot more fear. Okay. Like if you go out into the jungle and you've told yourself there's a lot of scary things in the jungle, and you go and you hear a noise and you start panicking, and then the cute little bunny comes out and you want to hug it. But you were freaking out when you heard that noise behind the tree. That's what happens when Rahu's in the 7th house. A little something will happen and it'll feel really threatening to the Rahu closest to the 7th house person. Okay. And no one has more things to learn about relationships than the person who's got Rahu closest to the 7th house. Okay. The reason that is because they've spent the least amount of experiential time in relationships in their recent past lives. And it's going to take them the longest to get relationships right as a result. Just simply because experience is at the end of the day what it's all about. Okay. Knowing how things work. Okay. All right. The other thing is the 7th house is where Rahu and Ketu, the 7th house is where the 4th house and the 10th house come together, right? So that means the person with Rahu in the 7th house really has to explore their parental issues on both parents. Okay, so they really need to understand how, wow, both parents are having a huge influence on their relationship life. See, what happens is our parents basically are training us to have relationships in functional and dysfunctional ways. Okay, when Rahu's closest to the 7th, most of what they're teaching us is mom's teaching us how to have dysfunctional relationships most of the way. And also dad is teaching us how to have dysfunctional relationships at the same time. And by dysfunctional, I mean relationships that are not the way the person needs them to be. Okay, functional for you and functional to me, totally different things. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Well, Rahu is, we get trained to have relationships in a way that doesn't work from what the dad's training us doesn't work, what the mother's training us doesn't work, neither of them work. And so the person goes into relationships with no training, no habits, no experience of relating in a way that has anything to do with how they really need to be in a relationship. So they have to break free from that training and discover all by themselves, what does a working relationship for me even mean? Okay. So they really have to break 2 patterns, a mother pattern, a father pattern, and find out what's uniquely right for them. And that takes a lot of time. Okay. And the closer Rahu is to the 7th house cusp, the stronger that influence is. If Rahu's in the 6th or the 8th, yes, it's closest to the 7th house and you're dealing with this. Okay. So the people need to take time. Now, the other thing that's happening when Rahu is closest to the 7th is that Ketu is closest to the 1st. So Ketu closest to the 1st has a pretty good idea of who they are and what they're about. Okay. And we're told you need to know yourself. Okay. Ketu close to the 1st knows a lot about itself. That's one of the nice things about it. But what we're not told is that we can't know ourselves only by knowing ourselves. Okay. The problem with Ketu in the 1st is that it spends a lot of time trying to know itself by studying itself. The other end of knowing ourselves is the Rahu closest to the 7th, which is, what do you want? What a person wants is the other half of defining who we are. Okay, so if a person wants money, It means they're a person who needs money for some reason, right? It means the person's a financial person. That's what it means, right? Okay. If a person wants God, what that means is that they're a spiritual person, right? Okay. If a person wants company, it means they're a lonely person, right? So, what we want shows us the other half of what we are. So the Ketu in the first house person, closest to the first house person, thinks they really know who they are and they think they know what they're about, but they've come to that conclusion without experience or investigating what they want, without seeing what they want, without figuring out what they really want. And so they're also on this journey to figure out what they want, because that's the other half of the definition. Until they go into that world of desire, that world of what do I want, they're walking around with only a 50% understanding of who they really are. But wherever Rahu is, we have inhibitions about going there. So Rahu close to the seventh is like, oh, what I want doesn't matter. What I want isn't good. Or, there's a way they don't deal with their desires on a healthy way. And they need to learn that they have, like lots of times a Rahu closest to the seventh house person grows up in an environment where certain things are not considered acceptable to want. And so the person doesn't get to explore wanting things for one reason or the other. There's some conditions on that's bad, like maybe they're a religious family and that's not allowed. Or maybe there's a judgmental parent that, oh, you can't, why would you want that? That's a bad thing to want, things like this. And so the person grows up not exploring their want, okay, what they want. And so they come out of that stunted and not really knowing themselves fully because they've never explored what they want, okay? So they have to start exploring what they want, and through that get a healthy definition of themselves. Until they do that, they can't make choices in anything in their lives fully because they're just working off half the deck. Okay, you understand? Okay. And through that, they find out who they are as a complete being instead of a half being. Okay. The other thing that's really important to know about if you have Rahu closest to the seventh is that Rahu closest to the seventh is always going to cause you to have some chaotic people in your life. Okay. Rahu is where things are not happening in a rational fashion, basically. Okay. Rahu is out of control. Ketu is where things are controlled. Okay. So the Ketu closest to the first house person, there's certain parts of them that are really under control. Those are the parts of themselves that are really in touch of. Ketu is a controller. He likes that. He runs a tight ship, Okay, only where Ketu is. Where Rahu is, it's open territory. There's nothing controlled. There's nothing regulated. There's no laws. And when Rahu is closest to the seventh, that's what the partner is going to manifest. Okay. So that means when you look at it from, that the Ketu in the first house person's point of view, the partner is causing all kinds of problems. Okay. Because the chaos always comes through the Rahu house. But they need to understand that the way their partner is manifesting, the out of control parts of their partner that are manifesting are really just a mirror of the parts of themselves that they're not aware of that are out of control. Okay. And for men, that means they're on an emotional level, they're not in touch with their emotions. And when we're not in touch with our emotions will eventually get out of control. Right? Our emotions are here to show us how we feel about things, or to tell us something about ourselves based on how we feel. So we feel a certain something, that's telling us something about ourselves. Okay. Ketu closest to the first, in a man's chart, has not been paying enough attention to their emotions. So their emotions will eventually get wrapped up into a nasty little ball of something and be out of control. Okay. And that will manifest as a partner who will act, inappropriately, act out of control, act radically, who knows, cause a lot of trouble, create a scene and that kind of stuff. So the man with K2 closest to the first needs to understand that's a mirror of how he's managing his own emotions, and that he needs to learn to get in touch with, observe his emotions, allow his emotions to have more of a role in his life. And as soon as he does that, his partner will settle down into a more balanced being. Okay. And I've seen this happen with men who do this, where their partner's right in front of them start settling down. Okay. Or if their partner's not able to stay settled down and the man really makes a shift, then of course he gets a new partner that is more settled. Okay. So it's important where Rahu is that we don't go around blaming the other person all the time, because we're somehow, that's our mirror. We have, the man has the emotional level. Okay. Now with Rahu in the 7th house in a woman's chart, it's a little bit different. Okay. The 7th house is the other half is our opposite gender. So if you're a man, the 1st house is male, the 7th house is female. If you're a woman, the 1st house is female, the 7th house is male. Okay. So Rahu closest to the 7th in a woman's chart, she'll have trouble with men who are irresponsible, men who are useless, men who are not good providers, because that's a reflection of her male side. That's a reflection of her doing side. Okay. So if she starts getting men who are more responsible in their life, that means she's, gaining more balance in her doing side. Okay. Got it? So there's a lot of ways this can actually manifest. Okay. But women who've got Ketu in the 1st house, on some level, they're not doing right for themselves. On some level, they're not taking advantage of their time to make the most of their lives. Okay. It might be that they are just going, that usually, oftentimes they're going to some kind of escapist realm. Okay. They might be binge watching TV. They might be health junkies and always focused on their health, but not really building their life. They might be, really into politics and following political stuff, but not really doing something to make their lives better. Okay. They might be, trying to meditate all the time, but then a lot of their life is just not moving forward. They might be smoking dope every day, or on drugs or something, or drinking. So there's basically a problem where they're really not taking advantage of their time to do. And as a result, they'll get men who for some reason can't provide for them. Men who say they love them, but don't provide the tangible proof of it, And again, those men are a reflection of that the woman is not doing her masculine part of taking care and doing in her own life. Okay. Okay. But either way you have it, when Rahu is closest to the 7th, relationships get better with time. And they can be, people can have very extremely difficult, surprising relationships, especially in their early lives, where, some shocking things will happen. It's like, wow, how could that even happen? So, but, as they get older and wiser and have more experience, and as the man with that position learns to get in touch with his emotions, let his emotions have some say, and the woman gets more capable as a doer in her own life. And by a doer, I mean a doer that's actually progressing and building something in her own life. Okay. I don't mean you're doing this, you're running around doing all this stuff, but at the end of the day, nothing's gotten built. Okay. I mean, doing it in a productive way. Then their relationships start to balance out. Okay. That's one thing you can always look for. Now, if you have the opposite, where you have Ketu closest to the 1st and Rahu closest, Ketu closest to the 7th and Rahu closest to the 1st, now you have a person that needs to find who they are. Okay. They have trouble in relationships because they don't know who they are enough. Okay. And to be able to know who they are, they have to become free of both parents' influences on them. Okay, because the seventh house is where the fourth and 10th come together, the parental houses come together. So they're dealing with some rigid parental, patterns of defining who they are, where parents have said, you are this. This is what you're allowed to be. This is what's most important for you to be. There's always something going on that the parents are trying to define the person, and they might be wonderful definitions. They're simply not definitions of who that person really is. They may be wonderful definitions. They may be abusive definitions, okay? It doesn't matter. Sometimes the ones who get the wonderful definitions are actually more scarred than the people who get the abusive definitions. Because when you get wonderful definitions and then it's not you, so you don't live up to it, you can really feel like a failure. When someone just tells you you're a failure, you can just say, actually, you're just an asshole, and maybe not feel like a failure. So lots of times I see people who've gotten wonderful definitions of who they are get hurt more. So any definition that's put upon us that isn't reflect who we really are is going to be harmful to us. And that's what a Rahu closest to the first house person has had on them. So as a result, they're really struggling to find out who they are. And they need to find out who they are. Until they know who they are, they can't make the best relationship choices. They'll make relationship choices based out of the definitions they've been given. Okay. Or the definitions that they found comfort in, but not the definition of who they really are. Okay. And the first house is the foundation of the chart. It's called the first house for the reason, right? Because everything hinges on that first house, the discovery of who we are. It doesn't matter if we have wealth, the second house, and it doesn't matter what things we're taking care of, which is the second house, if those things don't reflect who we are. They'll just be a burden. They'll cause us misery. Same with the partnership. If the partnership doesn't reflect who we are, who we understand we are, it's going to be an unhappy partnership. So Rahu closest to the first really needs to take the time to do step number one and define who they are, understand who they are, discover who they are. They need to go on the journey of discovery, of self-discovery. The Rahu closest to the seventh house person needs to go on the discovery of what they want. The Rahu closest to the first house person needs to go on the discovery of who am I really? And from that foundation, what do I need in my life? What kind of partner do I need in my life? Who can I actually really be in love with? Until they make that journey, they will not have satisfaction in their relationships. There'll always be something missing. What's missing? They're missing. They're knowing who they are is what's missing. And so instead of defining who they are, their relationships will define who they are. Because the minute we get married or get involved in a relationship, that becomes a big part of our definition. If we know who we are, we can have that definition next to us. And it's like, I am this, this, and this, and I've got this and this partner, and I'm married with 3 kids. But if you don't have your self-definition, when the relationship definition comes along, you have no definition outside that relationship. So that's what's the danger of happening when Ketu's closest to the 7th, Rahu's closest to the 1st. So it's critically important that Rahu closest to the 1st house people don't skip that step. And again, there's different, it happens differently for men and women. Okay. Rahu closest to the 1st in a woman's chart shows she needs to define who she is through her feelings. She needs to know what she feels about things. Because the 1st house is that, is the female side. It has to do with her female knowledge, getting knowledge from her female side. Ketu closest to the 7th house women can be really great doers. Wow, can they do a lot? Their masculine side is like, yeah, I can do shit. I'm capable down here. They're really great ladies. Okay. But Rahu closest to the 1st is like, but how do I even feel about what I'm doing? I don't know. I don't know if I feel good about doing what I'm doing. That's the thing that they get hit with. So they have to get in touch with how they feel about themselves. how they feel about things. That's a big part of their definition. I'm a person who gets touched and feels this way about certain things. Okay. That's the feminine definition. And so they need to really get in touch with how they feel about things, how they really feel about themselves. And those feelings are hard to get in touch with because there's all this parental programming of this is what you should feel good about. This is what you should feel is important. This is what you should feel matters, And they have to break free from all that conditioning and just say, actually, how I feel personally is very, very different. And it'll always be very, very different. The beautiful thing about Rahu is where we get to make our own definition. It's where we get to say, this is how it's going to be for me. Rahu in the first house is like, this is actually what matters to me. This is what I feel strong about. Okay. If in a woman's chart, Rahu closest to the seventh, this is what relationships have to be like for me. And there's no one else on earth that wants the same thing as me. Okay. So they're very personal, the definitions of Rahu. It's where we're really developing a new way of being. And that's why when people look at us and they see our Rahu house, that's the house they'll go, what are you doing there? Because we're doing it in our own way, or we're not doing it right at all. Those are the only options with the Rahu house. Okay. So women with Rahu closest to the first need to get in touch to understand who they are based on how they feel. Okay. Not what they do. Okay. When men have Rahu closest to the first house, they need to get in touch with their masculine side. It's their masculine side that's not developed. So they need to figure out what they're here to do. What can they do that feels important to them? Okay. Lots of times you'll see Rahu closest to the first house men. They just kind of take the job that kind of comes along. Okay. I've seen people like the number one thing that will make you do the same job as your parent, take over the family business, is Rahu in the first house in a man's chart. It's like, yeah, what I do, who I am is kind of defined by my parents. Okay. So what a person is doing when it's in man's chart is somehow defined by their parents. Okay. Now that's tricky because we tend to do the same as our parents or the opposite. If we do the opposite as our parents, that doesn't mean it's us. That just means our parents defined it by us going the other way, rebelling. Okay. So Rahu closest to the first house men, they need to figure out, what do I really want to do here? What's important for me to do? Who am I in this world as an active doing force? Okay. As a masculine force. Once they recognize that, then they can go, oh, so of course I need this kind of relationship. Until they recognize that, there's no way they can know what kind of relationship is going to work for them. Like if they decide they want to be a politician, they probably are not going to be able to marry that porn star, as a very extreme, that's a sad fact, but he's probably not going to get elected then, sadly, So that's like an extreme example, but you get the idea, okay? So the man has to know who he is. Otherwise, his relationships are going to define what he does. He's doing this and this and this because his spouse believes in that or thinks that or encourages that. But it may or may not be what he is, okay? So those are some of the challenges with this Rahu closest to the first or seventh. And what makes it really, really hard when it comes to relationships is that the person is not just dealing with father issues that are having a huge demanding influence in their relationships. And they're not just dealing with mother issues that are having a huge demanding influence. They're dealing with both of them. Okay. Yeah. All right. So in the old Vedic astrology books, the minute they see Rahu or Ketu in the seventh house, they're like, oh no, this person's going to cause you a lot of trouble. Okay. However, the reality is many, many people have great relationships eventually who have Rahu and Ketu in the seventh house or first house. They learn, they learn to get better. The Ketu in the seventh house person has an easier time sustaining relationships than the Rahu closest to the seventh house person, but their relationships tend to be lacking something. Okay, there's something missing there, you know. A Rahu closest to the seventh house person can have this amazing experience in a relationship, like, wow. And then it might take them 10 more years to get it again. And between the next 10 years, it could all be yuck, you know? And so there's this difficulty and consistency, but they can have really deep experiences where the Ketu and the seventh house person, it seems like it can go longer. They can last, they'll get married early and be married for 20, 30 years, you know? But then there's just this thing that's not there, you know? So it's challenging to have the nodes in these houses, and we have a lot of work to do on it, okay? So you need to heal your parental wounds, basically, especially when Rahu and Ketu are in the first and seventh, okay? All right. When we got or closest to those houses. So again, you have 4 flavors. What house is Rahu closest to is going to define your flavor. The other possibility is you get Rahu closest to your 10th and Ketu closest to the 4th. That's also going to determine a big part of your relationship pattern. In this case, is what's happening. A person is more emotionally controlled, and there's a tendency to only allow certain feelings to come into play. Okay. If we don't show up with all of our feelings, we're not going to make the connections we really want to make. We're not going to know enough about our feelings to make good choices on our relationships. So the person will choose a person that they feel really, really good about in this way, and they feel really, really bad about in this way. But bad feelings are not allowed, so I'll push the bad feeling part aside, and I'll just pretend I really, really feel good about this person. But underneath, I'm feeling really, really bad about them at the same time, and it's causing me to get ill, okay? So they have to really learn to pay attention to all their feelings, good and bad, okay? Ketu closest to the first says, let's brush the uncomfortable feelings under the ground. Let's hide those, okay? Let's bury those in the basement. And usually there's a parental person in their life who decided not to deal with their feelings. And so the child realizes that, geez, just dealing with our feelings is not really, you know, is kind of not kosher. We're not really supposed to be doing it. So I'm going to also sort of act like I'm happier than I am, act all cheerio, and just kind of the negative things we won't deal with. But in doing that, when we don't deal with our negative feelings, we don't know what we have to do. See, because a lot of what we have to do so we feel better on planet Earth, right? Okay, so if we don't allow ourselves to see the bad feelings we have, there's half of what we're supposed to be doing, we're not doing it. And that's Rahu closest to the 10th house, which is the active doing house. Then Rahu doesn't know the right things to do. And Rahu will do its thing and say, this is what I'm going to do. And things will always go wrong. And there'll be crises that come out of nowhere. And people will fail them. They'll have someone who says, I'm going to take care of this. And the person won't be able to take care of it. And it'll fall back on their responsibility. So the people end up having issues of responsibility in their lives. Rahu's closest to the 10th, the person, that's about a person learning to take responsibility for how they feel and what's happening in their life. Okay. That also means to learn to take responsibility for what's happening in their relationships. Okay. But what they do is, because they're not paying attention to the things they have to do to correct where they feel bad, and they're just acting on where they feel good, half their lives ends up not working. And that shows up, they're not being responsible to make themselves feel good, basically. And that comes up if they're managing a business or own their own business. Oh, things are always going wrong. Their employees are not getting done. They'll find people, they'll say, I'll pay you 20 grand, do this. The employees will do it halfway and then get sick and not be able to finish. The employees will rebel. The employees won't be responsible. The person will be mad at their employees and say they can't even do this. But really, the reality is that person is not really doing what they need to in their own lives. And then that's being mirrored to them in the people that they're in charge of, who are working for them, or the people that they're trying to put responsibility on. Okay. So basically, they need to learn to be more responsible for the things that go wrong in their lives. And the things go wrong because emotionally they're off kilter and they buried that emotion. So what this means is they have to develop a healthier masculine attitude. Because see, what the male energy does, the masculine attitude sees something and goes, oh, something is hurt, something doesn't feel good. Let me take care of it. That's what male energy does. Okay, that's like the damsel in distress, knight in shining armor scenario. Okay, the damsel, she obviously doesn't feel good with that ogre, carrying her away to eat her. So the knight in shining armor shows up, takes care of that, kills that ogre, takes care of the damsel in distress. Okay, that's what male energy is for. When a woman, she has a baby and her baby doesn't feel good, she turns into super mom, which is male, and takes care of the baby's feelings. So anytime we take care of something that doesn't feel good, we're being masculine. Okay. And that includes taking care of our own feelings, though. The Rahu in the 10th house person is simply not busy enough taking care of their own feelings. The most important damsel in distress in everyone's life is our own feelings, right? And then if they're not really taking care of their own feelings, they're not going to really be able to take care of the feelings of other people. They'll do things for other people, but they won't be the things that take care of that other person's feelings. Those are completely different things. Got it? So they need to take responsibility for taking care of the more vulnerable things, the things that are hurting more, and starting with themselves. Until they do that, their partners will feel like, gosh, how could you do that? That was cold, that was heartless, that wasn't what I needed. It'll scare the partners away. It'll hurt the partner. And the partner basically will not get their emotional needs taken care of on a healthy level. Not that we're meant to be codependent, I'm not saying that, but on a healthy human level, the person won't be able to provide that. The person might be the best gift giver on earth. The person might do amazing things all day long, but that's not necessarily the same as taking care of what really hurts. They don't know how to see what really hurts and therefore what really needs to be taken care of, because they're not acknowledging within themselves what really hurts and what really needs to be taken care of. So they need a reality check of what they're doing in respect to making sure they do the things that really are going to make the critical difference to how they feel and how others feel. Because ultimately, the only reason we should be doing anything is because it makes people feel better, right? It makes us feel better. It's stupid to do something that makes us feel worse.
That's true.
Right? But don't we all do it a lot? But the Rahu closest to the 10th house person does that a lot more. Okay. And they especially tend to really, well, there's really two types of Rahu closest to the 10th people. Some people, when you look at their lives, it just seems like they're doing everything they need for themselves, but they're really not. There's something huge that they're not really taking care of. They're not really taking care of the core emotional thing they need to take care of. They'll be going on vacation. They'll be going to the spa. They'll go get R&R. They'll take themselves out. They'll pamper themselves. It looks like they're taking care of themselves emotionally, but there's this big emotional ball of pain buried away that they're like skirting over. Okay. And then there's the people who are constantly taking care of other people. I'm taking care of this. I'm taking care of this. And no, I don't need to take care of myself. Let me take care of you. Let me take care of you. Let me do this for you. Let me fix this for you. I'll be there for you. But deep down inside, the thing that's really, really hurting them, they're ignoring that. And therefore, ultimately, the thing that's really hurting in the other person, they're going to ignore that too. Because if we ignore it in ourselves, we can't see it in another person. To see it in another person, we're going to see it in ourselves then. If we don't want to see it, we won't be able to see it in another. Okay. All right. So it creates a lot of relationship challenges. Again, there's an imbalance of masculine and feminine. See, basically, there's always an imbalance of how we use our masculine and feminine when we have Rahu and Ketu in an angle. That's the greatest imbalance. And the closer it gets to any angle shows us where our greatest imbalance is. Okay. With this one, the imbalance is between our feelings and our action. Okay. And one of the toughest ones is Rahu closest to the 4th house, Rahu in the 4th, and Ketu closest to the 10th. Okay. Because now what's happening is the person's in a huge need of exploring their feelings. Okay. That's the place they haven't gone. That's the Rahu place. Rahu is the place we haven't gone before. Okay. And instead of seeing how they feel, Ketu closest to the 10th will just do what they decide to do. They decide more out of an intellectual decision of what they should do. Okay. And that would work great if that 4th house would just go away, if that feeling house would just go away. But it doesn't. It's still having a huge impact down there. And it'll eventually cause the person to go through cycles where they fall apart emotionally, they explode emotionally, they lose it emotionally, they are emotionally provoked to do something completely different. So they'll be doing this, this, and this until the emotions build up, and then they can do anything at all. Okay. It can make for a lot of chaos. And this one is actually the Rahu in the 10th house, I'd say, is tougher in a man's chart. Okay. Because men really are, masculine energy is really here to take care of the feminine. Okay, to take care of what can benefit from care. Okay, to take care to what's receptive to the care. That's what masculine energy is here for, whether it's a man or a woman who uses that masculine energy. But the 4th house is the house of the feelings. And women's intelligence is anchored in their feelings more so than a man's intelligence is anchored in their feelings. Okay, which means a woman who's in touch with her feelings will simply have more wisdom than a man who's in touch with his feelings to the same degree. Okay, so in the 4th house, Rahu closest to the 4th, or especially Rahu in the 4th, shows that the person really needs to get in touch with their heart, and that there's layers and layers of stuff between their consciousness and what they're feeling. And that stuff is not nice stuff. It's painful, hurt stuff. So they don't want to go there. So it's easier just to intellectualize, go into the male, the brain. When we make decisions with their mind, it's more masculine. When we make decisions more from an emotional level, it's feminine, right? So it's easier to stick to the 10th house, the Ketu house, and say, I'll decide what I'm going to do. Okay, I'll figure things out. I'll do all the study. I'll figure things out. I'll figure out the right thing to do, whatever. But if that's not taking into account what a person's really feeling, it's never going to end well. Okay. And in a woman's chart, it's tougher because a woman needs to come from the feeling point of view first, because the feelings are guidance systems to women in a way that men will never really understand. Okay. In astrology, we have a saying is that the moon is all knowing, and the moon is the feminine half of our psyche. And that's the emotional half. So the moon has this ability to just know something. The mind, the sun, is intelligent. Okay, it can have knowledge, and based on that knowledge, make decisions. But the moon is just all knowing. It's like that's a better guidance system. And that guidance system resides in the 4th house. So if Rahu is closest to the 4th house, a woman hasn't developed that guidance system. To quote, the stereotypical, she has learned to follow her heart. But in a true way, where the heart is actually a guidance system that can direct her to the best fulfillment in her life, that can help her direct others towards their best fulfillment. Rahu closest to the 4th hasn't developed that. Okay, and in a woman, that means she really needs to learn to get in touch with her emotions, get in touch with her emotional body. And until she does, She'll try to control things, dictate things, decide things with her mind. And it'll go along for a little while, but then it'll all go to hell. Everything will blow up and everything will be chaotic again. Okay. It creates a very chaotic life if Rahu's closest to the fourth house in a woman's chart. It's really, really hard. The reason is because they're not following their guidance system. Okay. So if they start tuning into their inner guidance system, that's when their lives work. That's when they pick right partners. And they won't pick right partners until they do, because their guidance system will tell them to pick wrong partners and this partner. Okay. Now, in a man's chart, something very different happens. And that is that the man who's not really in touch with his feelings in a real truthful way, there's an element of being cut off from their feelings. They're not as emotional. So that's not going to cause them to, to behave in an irrational way, because they're not motivated by their emotions as much. But what happens is they develop a lack of emotional care for other people because they're not getting in touch with their feelings. How are they going to really empathize and relate to other people's feelings, right? So in their relationships, they won't respect the woman's feelings enough. No, I don't need to talk about this. You're just being a crazy broad. I'll hang out with you. We'll go have fun. We can have sex once you get over it. Okay. So there's not this affinity for the emotional realm, basically. Okay. And of course, that's going to make a woman really, really frustrated with that guy. And it makes him not really take care of enough of the picture. See, Ketu closest to the 10th in a man's chart, he's going to take care of a lot of the picture. He's going to be responsible in some ways. He's going to be planning things. He's going to be making some things happen. He's going to be capable of certain things. But what he's not going to be capable of is really taking care of the woman on an emotional level, in the level of what she really needs, because he's not involving himself in that realm enough. He's not in touch enough with his own emotions to really go there with the woman either. Okay. So eventually the woman starts to ask themselves, why am I even with this guy? He doesn't feel like he loves me at all. On one level, it seems like he does. He wants to do things with you. He does provide some cool things. But then on another level, he's just like, your emotions, they're not getting loved and cherished, and it gets really frustrating. So there's the person just simply becomes, the man with that Ra in the fourth kind of becomes incapable of relating to some part of the woman. Okay. Until, of course, they get in touch with their feelings. And to do that, they have to work out their mother issues. If you got Rahu closest to the fourth, it's your mother issues that you usually have to work out. Okay, you have to explore where you are not allowing yourself to feel, where you're not allowing to see your needs get met because of influences from your mother in most cases. Okay, Rahu closest to the 10th, person has to get in touch with their father issues in most cases. Okay, but again, they're both there. We have to start, when Rahu's in the 10th, we tend to start with the father issues. Rahu in the fourth, we start with the mother issues. And that'll take us on a journey to the issues we got from the other parents. And so it's really important to understand and study the influence of your parents on you. And our parents are not to blame for our behavior.
Sure.
Okay? Our parents are a symbol of our behavior. At the end of our last lifetime, we had certain behaviors, certain ways we dealt with ourselves, and as a result, certain ways we dealt with others. And so when we're born in this lifetime, we have this big symbol of that called parents. Okay. And then we continue to attract symbols, things that symbolize that in the form of relationships that don't work. Okay. And so we have to heal these unbalanced parts of ourselves, which are basically Rahu and Ketu. And I know that you've seen a lot of this stuff, because I can see that some of the things I said, you've seen around you and maybe experience some of it.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us some of the things you were thinking about?
Yeah, there's a few things that I was thinking about when you were saying about the Rahu and Ketu component, especially when it comes to planets and stuff. I have seen, like, especially when a relationship, when you're kind of laying over the charts on top of each other, and if their Ketu is touching their planets, either it's a negative planet or a positive planet, I find that there's a lot of past life and a lot of like duels that happens in between. So there's a little bit of a battle in between, and they want to get away from K2 more so than anything else. And Rahu tends to be more, a lot of guys that I have noticed, especially in charts, they really like Rahu on a woman's moon. And they find that really attractive for those things. And in whatever reason, it could be a negative or a positive, where the moon psychology side of it. So that's what I have seen when it comes to Rahu and Ketu, especially if it's either on, what I have seen, like if it's the Rahu in the first house, either it's going to give you the narcissistic kind of personality in a man, or the Rahu in the first house for a woman, it could give them the imposter syndrome.
Okay. And what do you mean by that exactly?
So imposter syndrome is practically, it's like overcompensating the masculine side of it. It's like, I need to prove myself to, like you were saying earlier, saying like, I need to be in the doing mode and forget the feeling, the feminine quality of it, the masculine and feminine quality. I don't need to feel certain ways because I'm doing right. That's more important, right? That's more important than anything else. So, and that's what I have known. Rahu in the seventh house in the man's, I find, like you were mentioning earlier, they attract a lot of different type of women. It goes from anything from a drug user to a woman from being in Hollywood, or a woman who work in the corporate world. It's just all kinds of women. There's no specific one. They're not racist at all. They're not, they don't have any of that problem of picking a woman in general. It could be any type of woman in general. That's what they really like to pick. So, which is kind of really interesting in a man's point of view. But when it comes to a woman's point of view, a man's point of view, a woman's point of view, it's like anything as well. It works the same way. It's like anybody that needs nurturing, let's bring him in. Right.
Yeah.
So that's what
And
I want
a
to
lot
say.
of it is that they don't, when Rahu's closest to the seventh, the person, they haven't defined what they want in a relationship.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's this type, then it's this type, then it's that type. And there's, it's like some people, they have these, they know, they go, I want this, this, and this in a partner. Right. They're looking, they're shopping, they have a shopping list. Rahu close to the seventh has no shopping list.
Right. There's no shopping. There's no checklist. It's just anything goes. We'll bring them all in. Right. So that's what I have noticed as well. Ernst, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today to come and talk to us. And I think so many women and men is going to have, this is such a beneficial information, because there's something like lack of outside of understanding what Rahu and Ketu and where it lands in. So I totally appreciate that. Do you have any words of wisdom that somebody's either struggling with their Rahu and for somebody like that?
Really, the main thing about Rahu is that we just have to recognize it's a long game.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of time to get Rahu sorted out. So whatever angle is the closest to, it's a lifetime process, really.
Right.
And we really don't even have the experiences to even begin doing it right until 42. That's when Rahu matures. Right. So, it's really, we have to take it easy on ourselves, be forgiving, and realize that this is a journey of sometimes even lifetimes. And our job is just to make some progress. We don't, we just, I don't know, we just don't want to beat ourselves up because we're dealing with something really hard. We're really have huge healings to make. Right. And that takes time. And that's the beautiful thing about it. There's the saying, time heals all wounds. Time is what's in your favor. Right. Time helps Rahu. Right. So all you have to do with your Rahu house in the end, if you just don't kill yourself, it's going to get better. Seriously, I mean that seriously, because that's when you do want to kill yourself. Usually you want to kill yourself because of your Rahu in the seventh, your Rahu house. Yeah. It's a disappointment, that house, that makes people jump usually.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, but time does help Rahu.
Mm, yeah, yeah. So thank you so much for the words of wisdom. Just hang in there. If Rahu is kind of giving the roller coaster moment, just say the rides. It's going to be fun, and you're going to have a good time, and that's all you have to really matter. So
It's giving you what you need to figure it out. So just
yeah.
go for it.
All right.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Cindy. Bye bye.
Bye.